I realized my parents were operators. They were like this, like most
Right.
entrepreneurs are, right? They're like, we're focused. But if you're not focused on emerging technology that's actually hitting and you're not seeing it, you're going to be left behind.
If you believe we can change the narrative, if you believe we can change our communities, if you believe we can change the outcomes, then we can change the world. I'm Rob Richardson. Welcome to Disruption Now. Welcome to Disruption Now. I'm your host and moderator, Rob Richardson. With me is Seema Alexander, who is a friend of mine, a co-builder, a co-founder of DC Startup and Tech Week, as well as co-founder of Virgent AI and many other things, a serial entrepreneur, literally grew up on entrepreneurship with her family and just cares also about community and collaborating. So pleasure to have you on. Seema, how you doing?
Rob, I'm so good. I'm excited to be here. We've been talking about this for a long time. So looking forward to chatting it up with you.
Absolutely. Pleasure to have you on. And we're basically co-spirits. You just did, you're in DC, I'm here in the Midwest, but you know, we're moving and shaking and disrupting together. So literally, I think you have a company that says disruption too. What's your original company?
We're like twin flames in a weird way, Rob, because my company is called Disruptive CEO Advisory. So I ran a repositioning advisory company for 10 years. And I was like, when I saw Disrupt Now and all the things you're working on, I'm like, we're meant to know each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's always going to get better. So,
yeah.
Well, I want to talk about your journey into entrepreneurship because it feels like it started a long time ago with your parents, because you bring up the story pretty often about your parents' business, their journey into entrepreneurship in this country. Talk about the story of your parents and how your parents' entrepreneurial journey influenced you as a person, as an entrepreneur, and what you're doing now.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes to say with a lot of immigrant families, you know, many people come to America to figure out like the American dream, right?
Right.
And for them, you know, they came out of a very like a poor-stricken sort of situation in India, and through a lot of hard work and a lot of sweat equity, Rob, they started the first Indian vegetarian restaurant in Washington D.C., catty corner to the White House.
Wow.
And a travel agency, and there were a couple other small businesses along the way. And, you know, the brands grew, the community grew, they got to really be pillars in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And the story goes that I started working when I was 12 years old. You know, you're in hospitality at a young age. You learn a lot of things really quickly.
I had a comment too. My mom had a restaurant that I worked at.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you learn customer service, you just learn people management, all these things at a young age, which, you know, at that moment in time, you're like, oh, I gotta go to work. And then now you're like, thank God, like, you know, like, cause you learn so many lessons at a young age. The story goes, it went from doing really well to close to bankruptcy in the mid 90s. And, you know, there were a lot of personal implications on the family. Parents got divorced. A couple of years later, my dad tragically passed. And it was sort of when at that moment in time at a young age, I started to have empathy for founders, Rob, because it was like, you know, being on the personal sort of the child side of things, like you see all the ups and downs when your parents are building something. And
Absolutely.
We were there when things were good and we were there when things weren't good. And so I sort of got obsessed with like learning why businesses fail and why they succeed. And that like started my curiosity into entrepreneurship. Fast forward though, after college, I went to Maryland, studied my business classes and stuff. And that's when I started leaning in and all the things, but I wanted stability. My goal was to be a chief marketing officer of a Fortune 500. And I wanted to leave the DC area. And I wanted New York. So I ended up moving to outside of New York City. Actually spent about 17 years there, which is kind of crazy. But spent 13 years of that time in corporate America. So at Prudential Financial, sort of an anomaly in my generation. Stayed in 5 of the businesses there, was under the CMO in the retirement business when things shifted 10 years ago. But the 2 things I will mention here, which also impacted my entrepreneurial career, if you will, I got to spend time with 2,500 financial planners, which are like sort of commodities in the marketplace. And my job was, how do you make them unique and different and grow their practices in a very sort of saturated market? And it taught me a lot of lessons about how do you differentiate yourself and brand and all the things. And then the second large project that I think was a game changer for me was working on the historical repositioning of Prudential Financial with all the CMOs, the CEO, all the global folks. And it was, how do you take this 136-year-old company that has 7 divisions, multi-billion dollars, but it looks like this old stodgy insurance company to the
Right.
market. And that was the coolest thing in the world for me, because it was like I went through a multi-million dollar process, going through all the steps. And I had an epiphany moment through that process. I was like, man, like, do entrepreneurs do this? Like, do they actually step back? Because who you are when you first start in a business is never where you end up, right?
No.
It was like this moment in time of inflection got me to really think about, like, I've always been focused on how businesses grow and how they succeed and all the things. But I'm like, this is that missed moment in time, because people focus on people, process, technology to grow. But
Yeah.
many companies have evolved and they haven't refined their business model or their unique positioning in the marketplace. And so, I mean, I don't know if you want me to keep going to the
No,
story.
but you talk about, but I want to nail down part of the story, because I've heard
Yeah.
you. I've heard parts of the story, and when I heard you present a few times,
Yeah.
and you use the example of your parents' business and not understanding where the world is going as an impetus to where uh, how we need to think about things now, right? In terms of like your parents going from brick and mortar to thinking about things online. And for now, how we think about where we are in this moment, which I don't know if you call it where we at Web 2.0. I have no idea what we're calling this moment
The
in
business
between AI.
technology.
I don't know what the hell we call this moment, but between now, but pre generative AI and
Yes.
implementing AI, like how did you draw upon the lessons of what you went through with your parents, and how do you relate that to when you talk about businesses now and their need to embrace AI in terms of how they actually implement it into their business?
So fast forward, advisory company, 10 years, worked with over 1,000 founders, different industries. The last several years, two key things happened. One was I realized that I was working with a lot of emerging tech companies. So Web3, smart cities, and then I was asked to advise an artificial intelligence development environment that specialized in AI agents a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And at that moment in time, it was very interesting for me because I got deep with some of the visionaries in the space on both sides, like extreme sides
Right.
of AI. But it was like when I started to understand agentic workflows, when I started to understand like what was actually happening, this was pre LLMs and generative AI, and then it
Oh
got in.
wow, you were really ahead of it.
It
It
was
was pre
like, it was
LLMs.
there, but it was like but what was happening was, wow, this, like that moment in time where I was like, this is bigger than the advent of the internet, because the power in what is possible with the current infrastructure, where it's being built, the accessibility. And that's when I actually went back and I was like, shit, man, like, excuse my language. And I was like, my
No, you
parents,
can cuss on this. It's cool.
you
Cuss
know,
how you want.
okay, cool. But I was like, I started to think about, like, I used to say it was strategy, it was this from my parents' business, but what was happening in the 90s, Rob? Like, that was like the rise of the internet, right?
Absolutely.
And to your point, right? I always preach about, like, before the internet, businesses were brick and mortar for the most part, right? Post internet, all of a sudden you have digital, you have internet, obviously, and you have digital. Then you have Google, SEO, AdWords, all the things to market your business in a whole different way. Different segments were actually growing and new segments were growing. And then some old segments were failing in the market because they weren't paying attention to what was happening in emerging technology. And I realized my parents were operators. They were like this, like most
Right.
entrepreneurs are, right? They're like, we're focused. But if you're not focused on emerging technology that's actually hitting and you're not seeing it, you're going to be left behind. And so I do a lot of talks now on this, like, comparison of the rise of the internet and where we are, what I consider is the biggest technological revolution of our lifetimes, with this AI transformation, all the things that come along with
I
it.
agree.
Yeah, and there are going to be businesses that come out of the woodworks that we've never ever seen possible before. There are going to be businesses that were major players that fail. And there are going to be a lot of small businesses that get really affected because they're not paying attention.
No, I completely agree. So when it comes to AI, what are we underestimating when it comes to AI? And what are we overestimating when it comes to AI?
I would say underestimating is the power of the technology. I think okay, when the world of Web3 was happening, and you and I
Yeah,
also,
you and I have been in that world.
right? And for the folks like who are listening, like, Web3 is a big word, right? It means a lot of things: blockchain, ledger, NFTs, like, protocols, layers. Like, there's so many crypto, obviously, and things that go within Web3. When you think about AI, it's the same thing. People have this one general idea. And for most, it's like Terminator type stuff, right? It's
Right,
the
right.
robotic side of things. They don't have real understanding of what the skills of the art of AI and machine learning, what is
Absolutely.
possible, what is accessible to not only create these unique automations that no one's ever seen before and it's possible today, right? But for innovation. And I
Yes.
think that to me, I'm trying to remember your question, but that to me is the missed part.
Yeah.
And I
What are we underestimating? What you answered?
yeah,
We're underestimating, which I completely agree.
yeah,
The actual power and the transformation that is happening and what is going to happen
yes.
is certainly being, as much as people are talking about AI, it is still underestimated in terms of the impact it's having and it will have on our complete society. And Web3 is your example, right? Web3 is, I simplify it as like Google Docs without Google. It's about ownership
Yes.
and understanding and being able to understand and own and authenticate data. That's what it is. Um, AI is the amplification and the manipulation of data at scales that you can't even understand, right? So it's going to be the fuel that makes everything possible in a way, right? Because data has been that. It is now going to take data and put like fuel in it to make it go to the moon.
I can't wait to talk a little bit more about that because I think data is what's going to make businesses stand out in the future and how they use their unique proprietary data to create unique experiences. But I want to answer that second part of your question.
Sure.
I think
And
the
then we can
over
get to that question next. That's a good way to go.
Yeah, the overestimation to me comes in. I think there's a lot of pressure for CEOs, from board members. There's a lot of pressure for founders to really think about how to use this technology without the actual education. And people are making decisions based on limited information, and they're not going to the experts or people. Experts is a big word right now in this space with the next sort of wave of AI and ML. But they need to really invest in education,
Absolutely.
understanding what is happening and what is possible. Because if they do it right, and they're much more, because AI is infrastructure technology. At the end of the day, you have to focus on solving the bigger business problem, the bigger pain points, and there is just so much opportunity right now. It's like almost crazy. Like it makes me excited because I see it on both sides, Rob. The one thing I forgot to mention, and you mentioned earlier, is I'm one of the co-chairs here of DC Startup and Tech Week. So I see the innovation coming on that side. With
Yeah.
Virgent AI, we're focused on sort of this mid-size enterprise, and they're established companies. But it's like when you start to bring both of them together, of like, wow, if you use this innovation and put it into this automated flow, what is possible for your company now? And I think there is a lot of like people just don't realize that until they, even with education, it's also understand like what is the right education, because there's like
Yeah.
the fundamental stuff. Here's what AI is. Here's what natural language processing here. But it's like, how do you bring these pieces, these Lego pieces together to create real innovation? I think is very overestimated.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So, getting back to the other point about data and the importance of data with businesses. So, like, what is your perspective there in terms of how businesses can differentiate themselves in terms of how their data is leveraged?
I'm going to give you an example.
Okay, that's even better. I love it.
Yeah, because it's very. There was somebody who just actually shared this with me, and I loved it for this data specific example. So, I think it's called City Sports Group, and I please forgive me if I'm saying it wrong,
Okay.
but they're a company that has collected data over the years on performance athletes, like being designated at a sports team, right? And they just said they've had this information and they've used it for multiple reasons. But when you think about the sports world, right, when people are like looking at, finding the next LeBron, the
Yeah.
next player, the next big, the next Kobe, whatever, right? Like they're looking, they're scouts, they're agents, they
Sure.
go out, they look, it's subjective, right? And and there's some stats, obviously. But this company now has curated all this data over the years. And now what they're doing is they're saying, hey, create your decisions based on informed data. We have the data of these individuals. We know the missing things within your team. Let us help you identify the right types of players, the right precision, right? That precision player for your team. And there was there was a use case, and again, forgive me because this is a Spanish team, but it was like in a smaller city. And they were comparing, like they actually use this service, and they were saying that the big Spanish teams, like they get like $50 million in marketing budgets to use for spend. And for them, it was like a lot smaller, 8 million or something like that. And they said, to be able to compete, because you can't even get into the same arena with some of these bigger teams unless you have created return on investment in some capacity. And so they ended up saying, like, we're going to use this generation using data, created a team, and their team is doing like fantastic, just doing fantastic, like it's unheard of. But now they're up against these bigger teams because they can be, their performance is there. They created the ROI, both from a revenue perspective and a performance perspective. And what I'm saying is data can change experiences. Like it will change, like your own proprietary data so that's just one, right? That's like a whole new segment of the market. Think about like precision medicine or anything that you're like, oh, I was actually speaking to an insurance company the other day, and they're like, we have all these loss runs. We have all this information about our customers. How do we use that data to create better programmatics, better experiences for our folks going forward? Because now it's like we can use that for predictive analytics. We can say, hey, these folks, in the past because of these losses, these are things that you need to start to mitigate, or you need these additional insurance clauses to help support you because, you don't want to be in this situation. It's that level of personalization, precision that I think that can really shift. And just the last thing I'd say is like, a lot of people are like, well, Seema, we don't have a lot of data, and so it becomes like, and in general, there's this data lake houses, there's different structures, and to be able to start to curate where you are in your data cycle, but you need to start now. You need to start to really think about it. It's a foundational, it's currency.
Absolutely. And something we're working with is advising governments on this, right? Because you talk about who's got the most data.
Yes.
Governments, and the most inefficient use of data is also governments, right? So from my perspective, right, it's and there's just so many opportunities to serve citizens better, to be more efficient, to even just organize their information better. Like it's just that there's just a start of that, like because a lot of them don't know where the data is.
Yeah, in the government sector, how are you finding the current adoption cycle compared to other emerging technologies in the past? Are they open to it? Is it segments? Like, what are you seeing right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they're open to it once we explain the opportunities. And I think I've ran for office, so I have like a kind of unique opportunity and relationships in those space. So I talk to them in a way that makes them understand how this could help them right now, and how it will make their life easier, right? And so, like, I will give you, an example of not the actual person, but the type of client that we're looking at. Like, it's an office that deals with criminal justice, we'll just say, right? And we had a conversation, and one of the conversations that we had was like, oh, well, part of what they do is they manually listen into conversations between, like, people that are in jail and people from the outside, because often these folks will confess to crimes that they did, and they're able to prosecute the right people and get the right people sometimes out of prison and things like that. Wow. They manually listen to these things, right? So, like, you can just see, like, we can save all types of time, probably make sure we're freeing people up. Now, you still have to set up the right processes. You still need to have the subject matter experts there. You need to be very intentional about how you are fine-tuning and training this algorithm.
Yeah.
But you can just see that's one area. And this person came up with it, the person we were like, and she's not a technical person, but she just brought that up. So, like, once we kind of inquire about, well, so what are some of the pain points that you have in terms of dealing with your job day to day? What takes the most time? What I found, that's the most useful. And then the conversation moves faster. If you try to start with, because I made this mistake too, all the things it can do, it just loses them. So I usually try to say, yes, what are some pain points you're having? And it's much easier. I can tell you this conversation is much easier than, anything I've had in the past, like in terms of the internet and other things, because it's so much easier to see. And they see the opportunity to save them time and effort. The challenge is that like they have systems that are 30 years old.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. Not that it can't help them, but that they're not even at like automation, let alone AI.
Yeah. Actually, there's two things that you said. One of the things, when it comes to the government, are you seeing, because what we've also seen is like those internal processes to start sort of these beta pilots
Mm-hmm.
versus like those external, like, let me actually step back. What I loved about what you said is it's very similar to our process, is figure out what the pain point is and obviously what
Exactly.
problem it's solving. Because then it just becomes much more real. And it's not like, oh God, this big AI thing, we have to figure out how to use it, and it's scary, right? And I think that's, again, going back to your earlier question, it was like, again, people don't know what they don't know until
Exactly.
someone like yourself comes in and explains it to them for the opportunity. But I feel like in most cases, not just government, most companies these days are looking at how do we build something internally to prove the model,
Correct.
like prototype it, prove it, so that we could feel comfortable ourselves before we go to any external sources. Just curious if you're seeing
And that's definitely across the board what I've seen with governments, with unions, Franklin market. Like that's what we've seen. Like that's start something with a small specific, and then show some success. Like instead of trying to do something major, try to do something where you can show how much it can, change them even you start in a small area and then grow there. That's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, so it sounds like it's very similar to even mid-sized companies. But the conversation has been easier because people at least have they have some idea. Like when the internet first started, it felt like completely foreign, where AI is not as foreign as the internet was to when things were totally brick and mortar, right? Because it's like people had no concept. Like, what do you mean we're going to go online? It really, if you think about it, and we rewind 30 years. God, this was that long ago. Yeah, we still look young, but it was that long ago. But it seems like a weird foreign concept where now people understand, because we've been through, at least they should, we've been through so many iterations of what happens online that people, I think, are more open to it than they used to be.
I agree. I totally agree. And I think there was this big and I think it happened after the LLMs and generative AI. That whole,
Exactly.
that's when everything sort of shifted and people, ChatGPT, I'll give them credit.
Oh, no. ChatGPT created the UI UX, because that's what it comes down to. It's like, how do you make this, that's, Web3's still problem is that the UI UX, the user experience is not easy. It's still like, it's good for like developers and tech nerds, but that's not enough. Like, what ChatGPTs, they made it accessible to anyone, technical or non-technical, and that really opened up the world. Speaking of that, how do you see this when it comes to AI in terms of accessibility and where we're going? So I'd like to hear from you. What is the best case scenario for AI, and how do we make that happen in terms of however you define it, accessibility, building, inclusivity, and then what is the worst case scenario?
I think we're in an era because of AI and the tools that are truly out already for almost free on the marketplace. It's not like anybody can start today. Like that's like one
Yes.
of those things, in a sense of like, if you are curious, if you're trying to get ahead, if you understand even an inkling of like where AI is going, and obviously if you have the internet and you have accessibility
Right.
there, you can truly learn a lot of these things on your own. I mean, we're in the fastest time frame of being able to prototype things. You don't need to code. I mean, people are using cursor AI to like you prompt things that took forever. I just found out about a new bolt.new to help prompt
Tell me about what's it called? Alt.new?
bolt.new. Every day there's a new tool. But I think from an inclusivity
Oh,
perspective,
wait, before you get, what is bolt.new? What is that?
oh,
Because you
so,
went over
so
that quick.
I'm going to play with it, but one of our clients was playing with it basically, and you could create. It's prompting, but you can create like landing pages. You can create anything with it. It's pretty cool,
Okay.
and like good stuff. It's not like some of the tools out there that like the early stage user experience or user
Yeah.
generation in terms of the visuals are bad. And again, I need to play with it more, so I'll tell you more about it. But my whole point is like, there's free courses from Google, from NVIDIA. I mean, so many, YouTube, it's like inclusivity in a terms of like, this is an opportunity where we're all learning together. I feel and it can make sense and it's not totally over your head. I think there is a moment in time for that. I think that whole responsible framework, ethics, not having bias models. I think there's a lot to be done there. I think
I agree with that.
we've learned a lot from previous cycles, but that doesn't mean it's everyone's top priority. And
No, I don't think it's any priority. I think their priority is to build, make money, and then worry about that consequence later, which has been the model, right? And I think that's what makes me the most nervous. But the only thing we can do is build, right? And until there's policy.
Yeah. And so again, you were at DC Startup in Tech Week and you were on a panel that I wanted to curate very intentionally around this conversation on AI and responsibility, but really that innovation has implication, right?
Yep.
And I say that a lot as one of my pillars because it's easy to get really excited for technology. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs. This is one of the most biggest entrepreneurial moments. It is a gold rush and a lot of opportunity. But again, looking at the internet and looking at socials, looking at digital, like there are a lot of things that you can do ahead of time and get over your britches. And actually it's not a very feasible, viable, business or whatever it is. And either you're going to hurt a lot of people or you're going to hurt yourself. Right. And I think this concept of making sure when you're thinking about innovation, you got to think about impatience came from that example I had shared not too long ago, but it was kind of like when you're on your cell phone and you're going through your social media. I don't know if you see a cell phone, okay?
Right.
But it's called doom scrolling, right? Like it's this consistency of like looking down and just constantly being by yourself. And the individual who created that feature was on the Oprah special, and he's been talking about it all over. And he was like, if I had known 15 years ago that this feature would have, how much loneliness it's caused, depression it's caused, anxiety it's caused on people, I would have never created it. And that's an extreme example because you don't know always what what is actually going to happen from an intentionality perspective. But it's more being like open to understanding, like not every innovation is a good innovation, right? Like, let's put it in that risk factor. I mean, Elon says it's really interesting because he's like, there's a 20% chance that things could go really wrong. And I think it's just keeping that in mind because this technology I think it's at like Sam Altman talks about like there's like I don't know if it's 1 to 5 from an AGI perspective, right? An artificial general intelligence perspective. Right. The level of intelligence these AIs can actually have. And we're between a 1.5 and 2 right now. So the stronger and more powerful this stuff gets, it's going to get more autonomous. It's going to start thinking for itself. And if we're not, again, going back to your original question of what people are underestimating, they have no idea what the power of this is actually going to look like.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think I'll take it even a step further.
Yeah.
I would say even the people that are building the AI models don't fully appreciate the power of what's going to happen, let alone the general public, right? Because like when algorithms were being built, even in social media, I'm sure you know this, but no one knows how any of those algorithms work within one person because they're so complicated. It's like one person takes a part in like Cincinnati versus another person in California, and the algorithm is a nation. Generative AI builds on that because then it just builds on its own on that. So there's great opportunities, but if we're not intentional about how this is guided by ethics and principles, there could be problems. And, I'm a pragmatic optimist. So what I mean by that is I think history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So I believe we're going to probably go through some bit of pain to recognize this because we're going to keep moving until we are forced to be intentional. I hope I'm wrong on that, by the way.
Well, let me ask you, what do you think, what do you think is going to solve for it this round, right? Because like what we're seeing with Virgent, right? It's like people don't have governance policies and that should be part of it. And, when they're thinking about building, they're not thinking about it. So there's a level of education, right? But from a higher level government perspective, is it a priority? No,
the answer is it's not.
Exactly.
So what's going to solve for that is, I think in terms of and I hope I'm wrong, by the way, I hope that private sector intentionally builds and is very thoughtful about this. But I believe even if they want to be individually, the market will not allow that behavior to happen. Right.
Mm.
So how I think, unfortunately, the correction will be is something the same way we had to have correction with the housing market. Like there will be some some pain that will happen to society, and we will have to come up with that moment to adjust. I think businesses are going to go through that individually, and that's why I tell people, like, I believe, and I believe this to my core, that in this world with algorithms and AI, the greatest asset you have is trust, right? And so you can take the power of of AI and algorithms, and you could decide that you want to manipulate, and you will be successful for a long period of time. But I do think the cynicism you build up, the reaction could be so harsh that you could really, especially with social media, shut down your business pretty quickly if you're not transparent about how that happens. And you can have a reaction that you're not expecting. And then I also think how we implement AI, if we're not intentional, will have some effects that we don't anticipate. So even with the Industrial Revolution, for example, right? We got to the point where we got to a really good point in society. It was obviously better, but people forget we went through 2 world wars, a pandemic, uh, multiple labor laws having been put in place, child labor. There was a lot of things that had to happen to make sure that the Industrial Revolution was stabilized. People don't remember that.
Yeah.
I
There's a
think
lot.
we're underestimating that with AI, what that's needed. That's what I think.
I mean, you mentioned trust and how that is obviously a big virtue, and AI allows for it, but in a lot of ways it doesn't allow for it because you can't trust anything that comes out of AI currently.
Correct.
But with Web3 and like, that to me is like the biggest opportunity is
It
like
is.
bringing both of those together, building out real trust in the ledger and knowing verifying actual sources and things is going to be such an important piece because trust, like, to be honest, like anything you see could be super fake now, right?
That's
Like we
correct.
don't know until we know. I know lots of people creating innovations and solutions for that problem, but I
But it has
just
to build awareness. We have to care about it. Like right now, enough people don't care about it.
yeah.
It's not important enough for people. And I don't think it will be for some time. So I just tell people, like, if you want to be a business, I think there's opportunities to set yourself apart, that you're being intentional about. I think how you use AI, that you're transparent about it, and that you have some human connection to it, and that you're not necessarily that I tell people we can't predict the future, but we can envision it, right? And we can't control algorithms completely. If we're honest, we cannot control AI and algorithms completely, but we can dance with them and design them to be what we want to be and direct them in the proper direction.
100%. So, what I also saw with the cycle of social media when Mark Zuckerberg was put up in front of all the courts, right? And then there was Web3, say FTX or a couple, right? But like
Yep.
was put up in front of the courts because out of like doing all the wrong things, right?
Yep.
That's what people listen because they're like, holy crap, like this is major law. NFT world, right? Got tons of lawsuits now because people were using that as securities versus utility, right? And I think that's the way our government has done it up to this point is like
Yep.
use these big use cases and then go after everybody. And up to then, this is sort
Which
of
I
that.
don't think is a good approach either, but go ahead.
It's not. It's not. And
Yeah.
I think it's the innovator's dilemma, right? It's kind of like, well, how much do we push? What can we do for innovation? Are we going to get shut down eventually? And that's where like a lot of growth in Web3 was stunted for so long because
It still has been, by the way. That really hurt. Like
yeah,
that's a fact.
but but then let
I
me
was
ask.
one of those people too. That was the old companies back there. Like that's the truth.
Yeah.
And
But
so
let me ask you this: when and because you've been in an appointed role, right? Like when you don't know enough as a government official, which most like you're
yeah,
getting advised, but it's hard. It's hard to know like
very hard.
literally what's coming down, and then the right people to know who are the decision makers. So how does a government make decisions on policy without really understanding the technology? Like
That's that is a great question, and that's literally like the part of what we focus on as a both MidwestCon as a company as value. Like one of our values talks about is that we talk about is policy innovation.
Mm.
So I don't believe that. Okay, does a government official need to know how to program an LLM? No, but they do need to understand the basics of how AI, generative AI works, how prevalent it is, and they need to have a view about emerging technology. And
Yes.
And the question I asked you about AI, I ask a lot of public officials. Very rarely can they actually answer it with any thoughtfulness, but they need to be able to think about these questions. Like, what's your best and worst case scenario for emerging technology? And what's your plan to create the best case scenarios? What's your thought about AI and all those things, and how we can both support innovation and make sure we have clear policy? I think
Yeah.
we're going to have to reimagine how we do policy, and I don't know what that looks like. I know that we have to start having education to our policymakers, because they're going to have to play a role, and they're going to play a role, and they can either screw it up massively or really empower us. And that's I call it dance with the algorithms, because there's not going to be an exact system. We're going to have to kind of be nimble, but we're going to have to set some type of guidelines and measures for what we want our society to be, and technology should be amplifying those things. Policymakers aren't having those thoughts. So, being from a policymaker's point of view, like I understand why how hard it is, because they have all these things on their brain.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't understand is, like, this is one of the most important issues, period. Like, it is affecting, like, technology is affecting how we communicate. It's affecting racism. It's affecting misogyny. It's affecting civil discourse. And it's only going to amplify unless we figure out how we want to, what we want our principles to be around technology. And so I think I think the problem with folks in elected office is that they are approaching the problem from a 20th century perspective when we're in the 21st century. That's the problem.
Well, we got Elon now, so let's see what's going to happen. It's going to be interesting, right? Like,
it'll be interesting. Yeah, that I have. That's scary too, because like
it's a whole other podcast.
It's a whole other podcast. I'll just say, what we don't need is digital dictatorships either, right? Because that's also scary. But I would say that there could be opportunity. Look, I think there's opportunities in every situation, though, Seema. So I'm not one of these people, and I'm not going to get into. I didn't support the incoming president. However, there is opportunities in everything, right? And so I will also not allow myself to be in a state of constant anger. I'm going to be focused and figure out, because I think there will be opportunities in this moment. And if something good comes out of this, like in Elon does, or Trump goes, something that actually is beneficial, I will wholeheartedly support it. If I feel like it's not, I will definitely speak up. But my focus is not going to be on simply reacting to someone else. It has to be, for us, how are we building a better future? And what I know is, no matter who's in office, I don't think much is going to change when it comes to AI and things like that. And I do think we need to do more of our parts. I think you, me, and the others that are building intentionally in the space, like, we are the new civil rights leaders in a way, because we have to build the future and the vision of the future that we want. And it's really participating in this space directly.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I've had this conversation multiple times over around, look, whoever's in the office is in the office. Our voices matter more now than ever before, right? Especially there's not a lot of us, I would say, who are in the know, like, and I feel like blessed and responsible at the same time, right?
Exactly.
Where it's like, okay, if you don't speak up, if you're not doing these sort of podcasts where audiences are hearing, my goal is to speak around the world around what's happening, because I want people to understand what's happening so that they can either take advantage and also think about the implications for where they're at in life or in business, right? So I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's interesting. One of the things that also scares me, and I'm trying to think about both sides of the perspective here, because a lot of the work we do is more on the automation, data, agentic, all this stuff, and then there's the whole robotic side, right? And with Elon saying by 2040 that we're going to have more humanoids than humans on the planet, scares the shit out of me a little bit, Rob. I know the labor of things, and like,
with no policy, it should.
It's like, whoa, that's crazy, but that's the way of the world, like,
that's the way of the world, and it's and again, I think we'll learn some lessons. What I will not, we're always wrong when we predict the future. But I just say, what I do believe is that there are lessons to be learned from the past, not to lean on them. And I do think there's going to be there's a lot that hasn't been addressed and that we haven't thought about with this. So, and that's why, understanding this technology is there's no opting out. As you said, like you can't put your head in the sand and just say, I'm not going to adopt the technology, because you will get left behind. You will not be able to build your business. You won't be able to participate in society. There is no option other than adopting the technology, learning, and then figuring out how you make it better. I mean, that's what I tell people.
Yeah, I think from a practical perspective, just because I'm sure you have a lot of entrepreneurs on this in your community, right? Think about like your technology stack that you normally have for operations or marketing. Everything, there's going to be a whole new technology stack, right?
Yep.
AI enabled technology stack. It's actually something I get asked probably the most, Rob, is like, what do I use for this? What do I use for this? What do I use for this? It's like, what's the best tools to 10x, 15x your productivity or whatever it may be? And I think it's something that everyone needs to start to think about, because there's one thing of creating custom and unique things, which, depending on where you are in business and what your goals are and all the things, there's lots of opportunity there. But there's another just being, because AI, it's like a big buzzword right now. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
everybody's going to be running an intelligent business, right? Like that's really what this is. So just start to think about, what are those tools? ChatGPT is great, but it's not the end all be all. There's so much more out there. So anyway, I just think that's a really important thing for any entrepreneur, even any business leader, to start to think about is, what is our AI enabled tech stack, and how is that going to help amplify our productivity, our experiences, our customer support, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And how you just made me think about this is, I would probably ask a business owner, a government official, a nonprofit, whoever, what is a repeatable, scalable process that you have for your best practices?
Mm-hmm.
What is a repeatable, scalable process that you have for things that are going wrong in your business to improve? And then I would ask a third question: how can AI be used to help and amplify the first two questions, right? Because you got to really think about, like, there's nothing that AI can't help you do better when you think about the current pain points you have and the things that you do well. It can both amplify the things you do extremely well,
Mm-hmm.
and it can minimize the pain points you have for things you do poorly. So really thinking about what those things are specifically, and thinking about how AI applies to those things will save you so much time, money, and make you more money. So I tell people to learn by doing, experiment as much as possible. Is there any tools that you like? What are 2 or 3 tools that you use and you highly recommend? Then I want to ask you a couple of wrap up questions.
Oh man. I mean, obviously the chat GPTs of the world, but it's not just that. For me, I look at like Claude. I use Perplexity. It really depends on if I need more research driven stuff
That's
versus
Perplexity, right?
yeah,
Research.
Perplexity I use for research a lot. I mean, I'm a podcaster too, so I use Opus Clips, which is like, I just want you to understand. Do you use Opus Clips?
Absolutely, I use Opus Clips.
Okay, just this is again perspective. Not too long ago, this is like not too long ago, to create a clip, people
I have a podcast. I know. I've had it for 5 years.
audience until you're like, you had to literally get the video. Somebody had to transcribe your podcast. They had to physically.
This was a year and a half ago. A lot too long ago. It was a year and a half ago.
It wasn't a long time ago. This Opus Clips, you put your entire episode in, and you can prompt for like, I want engaging moments. I want some funny moments. I want this, that, and the other. And all of a sudden 25 clips come in. And not only that, it's like between 1 minute and 5, you can be precise. You can go in and edit it. You can add different parts of the script. It is, to me, and actually funny, I just reached out to the CEO because I was like, I really want to talk to you, because I feel like, I feel like there's some product stuff, but those are products that I want to amplify in my community, because
Absolutely.
they're done well, and the people that are in it to win it,
Yep.
right? Like, and that to me it's such a because
I got another one for you too when you're done.
Please go for it.
Have you used Notebook LM?
Oh, yeah, the one that brings everything together and makes your podcast like
that's free. That's free.
You want to talk about that? Because that's like the coolest thing.
Yeah, like, no, just literally for my questions with you today, I use Notebook LM. Like literally I did that, pulled it together, pulled the sources together, and helped me organize it. And what normally takes me, it used to take me hours to prepare for a podcast. It takes me, now I've done it for a lot of time. So that's all this. I also have some institutional knowledge, but And now what used to take me 3 hours probably takes me 20 minutes of prep, right?
Cool.
Probably. And it's starting to get less because that is like Notebook LM. You're just able to pull any source and it'll organize it for you, put the notes together for you. You can ask the question and it's free. It's just amazing, like the amount of tools that are out there. So I recommend people to experiment, pay for some of the stuff, even with ChatGPT, pay the $20 a month, and then do some of the other stuff. If you have anything like accounting processes, something I've done is because I'm not great at processes, but you have to be to scale businesses. But I've started creating processes, writing it down, then using ChatGPT to help with other stuff. I mean, and then dictating that, and then using ChatGPT or something else to come up with better results and making sure that I'm creating standard operating procedures. I mean, this can really, you are literally hurting yourself by not adopting the new technology. So, all right, a couple of things I want to get to you at the end, kind of rapid fire questions now. These are hard questions. They always trip people up.
All right.
I have faith in you, and I know you're ready. All right. What's an important truth you have that very few people agree with you on?
Important truth. Integrity is everything. Whatever that is, integrity is my number one value. I feel like if you're going to do something, say something, do it. But it's really hard to do. It's really hard to do, to keep integrity with yourself and with others. So to me, it's the source of truth, integrity.
I said the truth is simple, and life is simple. It's just not easy, right? It's just that it's just the truth. All right. You have a committee of 3, living or dead, advising you on life. Who would these 3 people be and why?
My dad. He passed when I was 23. I have so many questions for him, hands down.
What's one question you would ask him right now that you're thinking?
My God. I mean, I would ask him so many business questions, so many life questions. I feel like he was a community builder. He was a business owner. Like him and I, we would have rapped on every part of my life, Rob. Like he was so insightful, and
there was one thing you could think you want to tell him right now. What would you tell him?
I'm staring at his picture and I'm just like how he's influenced me and he's the reason I do what I do. And like, for me, I'm building his legacy because he was an incredible human. His life was too short and I'm just trying to keep going what he started and hopefully amplify it.
I'm sure he's proud of you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Who else you got? Who are your other 2?
My other 2.
If you have one, it could be your father.
Michelle Obama.
That'd be a good one.
I think her perspective on life, personally and professionally, her resilience and all the things that she's done and accomplished. I just want some very strong females around me that will push me in ways that I've never been pushed before. And I just appreciate her honesty and transparency and just what she continues to show up and how she shows up in this world. So that would be definitely number 2. Number 3, that's a hard one. Let me.
Doesn't have to be 3. We can stop at 2. If it's 2, it's 2.
Okay, let's do 2, and I want to come back to it.
All right,
because here's the one that actually I would love somebody, and I don't. That's what I have to think about who. But someone who in the emerging technology space would be really interesting. And I don't know if it's Mark. Because,
I mean, listen, you shouldn't discriminate who you learn from.
Sam Altman. I think it would be really amazing, intriguing, and scary to understand what's going on in his brain. And I'm very good at interviewing and just getting into some deep ass conversations.
We're going to project that you're going to get him on a podcast.
Yes. And the reason why is if we want to be leaders and have voices in the space, like you have to understand where people are coming from. And he has such a unique perspective and so much depth. And you want to hear both sides, the extreme sides and the sides. And then that allows you to actually create informed decisions. I'll just put him, make an AI agent out of his brain.
That's a good idea. There you go. Hey, a Chat G Sam Altman. Okay, interesting. All right. All right. Final question. What's your theme and slogan in life?
Oh, impact and profit. It's here. I have many, but that one has stuck with me. I just feel like for everything I do, I want to make sure I'm adding a ton of value and making a crazy amount of impact. And I think you can do that by living a really sustainable life, and you can do that and add more value and more impact when you do have that. And I feel like in the entrepreneurial world, in the nonprofit world, in the government world, a lot of people don't have that stability. And I think a lot of that, so that's always been my mantra when I help people create sustainable businesses, when I'm thinking AI and opportunities, it's impact and profit.
Right.
Yeah.
Is about like the truth about innovation, and talk about this like in terms of like what's happening, what needs to happen, how people need to be framing. It's one of those things that's been in my brain because, like you, I see the patterns connecting and how we need to be thinking about business innovation and growth in order to make sure that that we're well positioned as that businesses are, but also the communities that normally aren't well positioned are well positioned. But anyway,
All right, let's think about that. Well,
yeah,
you know,
I know, right?
I mean, it's definitely, I have to write it. I was going to write everything on the unique method before and the repositioning, but now I'm like, everything, this is the future of business. Like, I need to be known for that. Like, it is an important thing for me, is like, I see things and so do you. So
Yeah,
so
let's do it.
I want to use that as an ability to get paid internationally and speak. And
Yeah, that's we share that. We should think about that. Let's do it. Seema Alexander, who's also going to be a featured speaker at MidwestCon 2025. Also the co-founder of DC Startup Tech Week. Also co-founder of Virgent AI, building agents and helping mid-sized businesses learn how to implement AI. It's been such a pleasure. I can't wait to talk more with you. I will be in DC next week, by the way. So looking
awesome.
forward to connecting back if you have time. And
Yeah.
love everything you're doing, and let's continue to build.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob, for having me. This was an awesome conversation.
Thank you so much.